You're listening to That Thing Called Inclusion, a podcast filled with the ramblings of a Northern Irish blind man and a wheelchair-using English woman. Join our disabled duo as they share their lived experiences of disability and working within the world of recruitment. Let's end the stigma together. Let's talk about that thing called inclusion.
Okay, here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi everybody, you're listening to That Thing Called Inclusion. I am Jamie and I'm joined by
Fuchsia. Hello.
Hi everybody, it's so good to see you for another episode. And today's episode we have a real special treat for you. It is our 10th episode, so 3 months in, 10 episodes. At the side of a full-time job, we're smashing it, Fuchsia. Not to be vain.
We certainly are, thank you.
And just a wee recap on last time. Last time we were joined by Jamie and we were joined by Siobhan, and we were discussing demystifying recruitment. What actually is recruitment? What does a recruiter do? And how can we change that conversation between somebody applying for a job who's maybe disclosing, how we change that narrative and make that a lot more of an easier process. So, Fuchsia, do you want to tell us what's coming up on today's episode?
So I would like to introduce Jane from Evenbreak, the CEO and founder of an amazing company that helps with recruitment. And I'm trying not to lose my mind a little bit at the moment. So Jane, welcome so much to That Thing Called Inclusion. It's such a great honour to have you here.
Well, thank you. I don't quite know if I'm going to match up to that build-up, but I'm very delighted to be here.
It's so good to have you here. We're a little starstruck, so we are, because if anybody doesn't know Jane, as Fuchsia said, founded Evenbreak. She's also written, what was my English going on there? She's also written books around inclusion and how we break those barriers and change the conversation. Also connect the dots between finding inclusive employers for disabled talent. So Jane, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got to Evenbreak, your journey? Tell us all about you.
Yeah, okay. It's one of those things, like I think most people end up doing things that they never decided they were going to do. You know, I didn't think when I was little, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll grow up, I'll become disabled and I'll run a social enterprise around disability. It wasn't kind of on my career plan. But that's kind of what happened. So, I mean, ironically, really, I was really interested in diversity, inclusion, or as we call them, I'm very, very old, as we called them in those days, equal opportunities. But that whole thing around fairness has always been really, really important to me. And so I found myself in a career that was talking about diversity and inclusion, talking to employers about the benefits. And this was sort of diversity in its broadest sense, you know, race, gender, sexual orientation, and all the rest of it. And one of the things that happened when I talked to employers about disability, remembering that at this point I wasn't disabled, was that some employers would say, why would I want to employ a disabled person? I mean, they wouldn't use those exact words, but you kind of knew what they meant. And more positively, other employers would say, you know, we recognize that this is a group of talent we should really be tapping into, but we don't know how to, and disabled people don't apply. And I spoke to disabled people that I knew and said, why aren't you applying to the second lot of employers? Because they want your talent. And they said, because we don't know which is which. Every employer says we are an equal opportunities employer, but we know from our own, you know, lived experience that most aren't, particularly when it comes to disability. And I can remember thinking, that's really bad. Someone should do something about that. And then, ironically, I suppose, I became one of the, 83% of disabled people who become disabled as adults. And I discovered I had a degenerative spinal condition and had various, surgeries and whatever. And then it didn't get better. So became a disabled person, like what I'd been talking about all of those years. And it was kind of up close and personal, and still nobody was doing anything about this. Employers either not wanting to employ disabled people or wanting to, but somehow not succeeding. So I formed social enterprise Evenbreak. I'd love to say it was my idea. It was an idea of a range of people, a range of things that came together, but I like to take credit for putting the idea into practice. And So the idea was that we would have a job board that was purely for disabled people who were looking for new or better work, and purely for those employers who were enlightened enough to see us as, an exciting pool of talent rather than a source of problems. And I decided, so this is back in 2011, and I decided then that I wanted Evenbreak to be a social enterprise. I didn't want us to be a charity because actually employing disabled people is far from being an act of charity. It's much more about talent. But also, I didn't particularly want to run a business that was just going to line the pockets of a few rich shareholders. So for me, being a social enterprise was key to what I wanted to do. But the other thing that was also fundamental to me was to only employ disabled people so that everybody within Evenbreak would have lived experience of the barriers that candidates face when they're looking for work. And then 11 years later, here we are. We've grown exponentially in that time.
Wow.
And yeah, it's a very, very exciting journey to be on because I learn every day, not just about my own lived experience as a disabled person, but from all my colleagues, from our amazing, amazing candidates, and from the enlightened employers that we tend to work with.
That's phenomenal.
That's
So it
such an
is.
amazing journey. Oh my goodness. I thought I had a bit of a journey, but that's just wow.
This is it.
But it certainly wasn't one I chose. And also at the beginning, I was a bit sort of stymied because what had happened with my spinal injury was that I ended up really not being able to get out of bed very much for about 7 years, and starting a whole new business that's a tech business. So it's a kind of something you do sitting at a desk from my bed on my own was also a bit of a challenge. I'm pleased to say that I'm more mobile now than I was in those 7 years, but it wasn't just a case of, oh, I want to solve this problem. It was also a case of actually I don't know what else I can do lying in bed.
Need a job.
There's a limit, to the careers you can have. Um, and I did once Google myself and said, oh, Jane Hatton, the woman who earns her living lying on her back, which wasn't exactly the first impression I wanted people to have of me.
Imagine the headlines now. Headlines sell, though, don't they? But I love what you said there, that you're constantly learning. And that's something I think that we all say when you're working with an inclusion. You'll never know everything because everybody's different and everybody's preferences or adjustments is unique to them. So you're constantly learning and adapting, and I love it. But I wanted to ask, so with your role at the moment, then with Evenbreak, you only employ disabled people with lived experience. What made you come to that decision? Was it you wanted to change the narrative, or what made you create that decision?
It was a whole number of things, really. One, I mean, the main one is why wouldn't you? Because there's so much unused talent and wasted talent out there. Why wouldn't you want to employ it? It was also about authenticity because I realised that although I'd been working in the field of diversity for many, many years, and I'd included disability in that, but I'd recognised that I didn't have that lived experience. So I would co-work with someone who did have lived experience. And then when I became disabled myself, I recognized how very different having lived experience is from imagining having lived experience. And so I wanted us to be authentic. I wanted us to be credible with candidates. I realized that I was only an expert in my own experience of my own condition. I certainly wasn't an expert in anything else. But actually, if we had a group of people with a whole range of diverse life experiences, that would mean that we would have much more internal knowledge and intelligence about what was needed. And also, I wanted us to be a role model. I didn't want to be saying to employers, you should be employing disabled people. Oh, but I'm not going to. So I wanted to demonstrate that even an organization like Evenbreak that only employs disabled people can still be, and we are, tremendously successful. So actually employing disabled people is a real bonus for a business. It's not something that they're compromising on. It actually gives them additional things. And every day, you know, the team that the work at Evenbreak give us something that we would never have got without them being disabled. So for example, if we're looking for new tech, we need to know that that new tech is accessible. Now, often what happens is people buy tech and then they realize it's not accessible. So they've either got to go back and change it and do something different, or retrofit it with accessibility, which is never very
Yeah.
successful. Whereas what we can do, we can say to Mohammed and Lee, who use screen readers, can you just have a look at this tech for us and tell me if it works for you? So, things like that mean we don't make those mistakes, because we look at that inclusion and that accessibility thing before we part with any money, before we actually go down the road of purchasing anything. And then I can think of other examples where we talk about, we're trying to overcome a problem, or we've got something we're trying to think about. And I'm neurotypical, I'm just a bog standard thinker. And then somebody in the team who's neurodiverse will come up with an idea, and the rest of us will think, oh, it's ridiculous. And then we think a bit longer and we think, no, it isn't, it's genius. And they will have come up with ideas, solutions, creative thinking that I wouldn't have come up with in a million lifetimes, because my brain doesn't work like theirs do. So, when I'm telling employers, this is a really good thing for you to do, it's from that base of, I know it's a really good thing to do because I do it, and Evenbreak gains from it every day, and so that's in a very, very long answer to a short question.
No, that was a fabulous answer. I really like. We always hear businesses say, or when you ask somebody why are you being inclusive, and they say, "Oh, because it's the right thing to do." And for me, that was one of my cringiest moments. So anyone ever says it to me, you'll see in my face, my eyes squint and my whole face turns to the left. But it's because it's not the right thing to do. There's value in diversity, and what you're saying there is so true. You're getting different types of thinking, people who work differently. That is like one collective group of people you're taking that learning from. And I'm sure when you're working with individuals with disability or who are neurodivergent, you're learning there as well. And I think that's why I love this space within disability and neurodiversity, because it's just constant learning, as we said earlier. But one topic. Oh, go ahead, Fisha.
I got a question, Jen, because I need to say it.
Go ahead.
Because I really want to know, Jane. Have you ever had pushback from companies when you've said that you're 100% disabled employed?
Yes, absolutely. Usually the first one is, well, doesn't that mean you're discriminating against non-disabled people? That's usually the first reaction I get.
I knew that was
and my response to that is, as soon as we run out of talented disabled people, we might start looking at non-disabled people.
Oh my God. See, that's why I wanted to ask that question, because I get that so much with the work that I do, and it just drives me absolutely bonkers.
It's the narrative business have, isn't it? Businesses have this narrative that disabled people were problematic. We're going to cost them loads of money, and if we don't get our own way, we're going to take them to court. And that's not the case. All we want is the right tools and accessible processes in front of us and understanding. So, Jane, I wanted to kind of touch on something that we discussed when we were talking to you, and something you discuss when you're speaking and writing, is premium talent. So, for anyone listening, can you explain to us what is premium talent to you?
Yeah, so, often we were just saying about, what employers' reactions are. And often when I talk about, are you going to be employing disabled people? People are beginning to recognize that they should be having diverse workforces in terms of race, maybe gender, maybe LGBTQIA+. But when you talk about disability, the whole tone of voice changes and it becomes, oh yes, we poor people, we really ought to give them an opportunity. It's that kind of pity, charity kind of tone of voice and narrative. And for me, employing disabled people is nothing to do with charity or pity, and everything to do with talent. And I think it's the whole narrative around disability. We tend to look at media and news and programs and whatever, and disability is almost always portrayed as, disabled people are either objects of pity who have no agency, no ambition, no way of doing things for themselves, poor souls that need other people to do things for them, or we're seen as benefits grounders, or we're seen as heroes. Oh, she can tie her own shoelaces, the love, or or Paralympics, or whatever it might be. And I kind of think, comparing disabled people to Paralympians is like comparing non-disabled people to Olympians. How many non-disabled people do we know that can run as fast as Usain Bolt? Well, one, Usain Bolt, and so for me, it's the narrative is so skewed that actually disabled people are people who face more barriers than others. That's it in a nutshell.
Mm,
So, we talk about the social model of disability where it's not our condition that disables us, it's the barriers that are in society. Remove the barriers and we're no longer disabled.
yeah.
So it's really trying to get across to not just employers, interestingly, but also to disabled people themselves that we bring the same things to a business that non-disabled people do, plus a lot more. And so
Mm,
what I mean by that is that, there's an even spread across humanity, people, in terms of, skills and talents and qualities and things we're good at and things we enjoy doing and, particular skills that everybody has a diverse range of skills and talents and all those qualities. So if a disabled person applies for a job, they will apply for it because they have all of the skills and qualities that are required for that job. However, on top of that, going back to the social model, disabled people by definition spend a lot of time dealing with barriers, navigating around those barriers that are in front of us. Now, there'll be different barriers for different people. For some, it might be physical barriers, stairs or signage or inaccessible transport. For some, it might be technological, inaccessible websites or tech that we're using. For others, all of us, it might be attitudes in terms of, oh, disabled people aren't as good as non-disabled people. So we all have different barriers to navigate around. But what we do have in common is that having to do that on a daily basis means that we develop a whole set of other skills. So, for example, I'm not a particularly creative thinker by personality, but when I could no longer do anything other than lie in bed but wanted to run a business, this is going back, 11 years. I spoke to Access to Work and said, "You must have come across people like me before who can't sit. How can I use technology?" And actually, they said in those days, I hope it's changed. Actually, no, we haven't come across people who can't sit. We know people who can't stand or walk or talk or hear or see, but
yeah.
everybody can sit. Oh, no, they can't. So I had to come up with ideas of how to suspend a laptop above me without it falling on my head and knocking me out, kind of by myself. And how can I eat not sitting at a table? And how can I social,
Mm,
all of those things? How can I travel? And so I had to develop a really kind of creative way of thinking that meant how can I do things in different ways? I can't do them in the ways that other people do them. So how can I do them in different ways? And over time, I did develop that kind of creative thinking about I can't solve this problem this way, so I'm going to have to think of a different way of solving it. And in the same way, every disabled person that comes up against barriers has to do the same thing. I can't do this in the same way that most of the population do it. What are the other ways that I can use to do it? And so we develop by default, really, whether we want to or not, that kind of creative thinking ability, that kind of problem solving ability, that innovative ability to come up with solutions that other people might not think of. So I think all disabled people bring those additional qualities, whether it's resilience, determination, problem solving, creative thinking, project management. People with many conditions find it difficult to travel. So for most of the population, if they want to go into town and meet a friend, they just go into town and meet a friend. But
yeah.
for lots of us, you've got to plan that like a military exercise. So if I'm going on public transport, and the station I usually get off at, the lift isn't working. How am I going? Which other station do I need to get off to come back to where I need to be so that I can meet my friend? Or if I'm driving, is there accessible parking? And how do I get from the accessible parking to the venue? And is the venue going to be accessible when I get there? So everything has to be planned like a military exercise. So we develop these project management skills as well. And as an organization, as an employer, what you want in your organization is people who are creative, have initiative, can be innovative, can think of different ways around problems, don't run away at the first sign of a problem, but think creatively about different ways of assessing it. And that's all disabled people. But then if you look at some particular conditions, they may have benefits that come with them. So, I mentioned having people who use screen readers and actually vet the tech for us, which is great. Those creative thinking skills, I think, we talk about organizations employing people who are neurodiverse or who have mental health conditions as a luxury, but actually it isn't a luxury, it's a business imperative. If we want to stay ahead of the crowd and be innovative and come up with new ideas and be, on the edge of all the new things, we have to have neurodiverse people and people with mental health conditions in our organizations. Otherwise, we're just going to carry on doing the things we've always done. So, in that sense, we're also premium candidates. And then another, I mean, I could go on as you talk about this for hours, but I think finally I'll say that, the world of work has changed unbelievably in the last 2.5 years. And we know most notably that, working from home was seen as a reasonable adjustment for disabled people. And now working from home has become the choice of lots of people, whether they're disabled or otherwise. And organizations have learnt that work can be done just as effectively, if not more so, remotely. And also, people are working in different ways. They might be working flexible hours, they might be working remotely or hybrid, they might be working in part-time work or different hours. So not necessarily 9 to 5, but it might suit people to work different hours. And, some non-disabled people are struggling a bit with that because it's a whole new way of looking at the workplace. And my belief is, and it's borne up by a lot of evidence, that disabled people can lead the way in this new way of working because we've been doing it forever. We've always had to find different technology that's accessible so we can work remotely, or different ways of working, or job carving, or flexible hours, or doing things in different ways. That it's a way of life for a disabled person. So actually, in this new way of working, where the world of work is feeling its way very gently into this whole new, wow, things have changed beyond recognition, we can be there to support and lead non-disabled people in things that they're struggling with, that we can help them with. So yeah, I mean, employing disabled people isn't anything to do with charity. It's everything to do with talent because we are premium candidates.
If I could stand and clap, I really would right now. That was honestly brilliant. I was reliving, I think, nearly every memory of me when I was younger, trying to find employment and thinking of those. I think, what way can I get around this? I can't do this. How do I fix this? And even now, like when I'm out shopping and if I can't see something, straight away I have my phone out, zoom in, take a picture, look at the picture, zoom in on it again. It's little
Yeah.
traits like that, or little skills that people will have, and they've probably not thought about it. I didn't think about it. Fuchsia, have you ever thought about these kind of skills that you had?
I knew I've always thought differently because my school told me so, but not in a positive spin, shall we say. I was always told, oh, you're very creative, you can make things. Why don't you just go and make things? you know but yeah, when it comes to working, I guess because I masked my learning disability for so long, I didn't think that I needed assistive technology until my physical health started affecting my cognitive, because I ran out of the spoons to be able to fight my dyslexia and autism when I became a wheelchair user. And that's when I started noticing that I was really very good at planning a lot and how I could almost flip any situation to make it easier for me by just tweaking a few things. But in my head, I was thinking I'm let everyone down because I'm working from bed today. Oh my God, I shouldn't be doing that. I shouldn't be talking to candidates whilst I'm in bed. And then I was thinking, what kind of label of ableist BS is that? What am I doing to myself? Why am I not using this technology? Why am I not working from bed?
And why will you masking have a learning disability instead of being proud of it and telling employers, I'm going to be better for you because all of those things we've just talked about. We shouldn't be masking or hiding who we are. We should be proud of it and shouting loud about it.
100%. I think we all wear those masks, don't we? It's everybody has those masks, and I think when you're trying to find your confidence in your disability, because I didn't have confidence even talk about my disability until I was 28. Like, I'm 32 today, and for that I masked for so long, and I tried to fit into everybody else, and I don't know how I did it, or people knew and just kind of stayed hush about it. But for me, I think when I started taking off the mask, the problem was society was asking for help. People would almost shoot me down. And you're right, Jane, there has been a shift in that in the past 2.5 years. When I first started my full time employment, it was not like this. There was no inclusion talk. There was no representation. I couldn't even apply for half the jobs because it was an accessible format. But in terms to any of our listeners listening, what would you say to them who maybe are still masking? What advice would you maybe pass on to them in regard to that? Coming maybe unmasking?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge, huge, huge decision for anybody to make, isn't it? Because,
Yeah.
non-disabled people don't have, or even visibly disabled people don't have this dilemma about, shall I talk to an employer about my disability? Because whatever you do isn't a great decision. So if you decide to mask and go for an interview, then it may be that your previous work history has been affected. In which case, if you're masking, you can't say to your employer, your prospective employer, actually, my CV isn't as impressive as it should be because I haven't been given the opportunities that, through discrimination. But
Yeah.
also, it means if you're masking that you can't ask for those adjustments you might need in the recruitment process. So you know that you're going to be automatically a disadvantage. You're not going to be able to perform on an equal footing with the non-disabled candidates who are applying. On the other hand, if you decide, well, that's not going to work for me then, so I'm going to be open about it, you know that there's a risk of an organisation, employer, a recruiter thinking, you're disabled, not sure you're
Yeah.
going to fit the bill. So really, whatever decision you make, you're a bit screwed. But I think, in my opinion, now, I mean, I often say it depends, and it depends on what you're trying to achieve. And if you think that you can get through a recruitment process because you don't face particular barriers in that setting, then maybe it's none of the employer's business whether you're disabled or not. It's up to you whether you choose to or not. My personal view, and I can't force this on anybody else because we're all completely different, is that I would want to be open because it's not just the recruiter deciding whether I'm good enough for them. I've got to make the decision about they're a good enough employer for me to work for. And if I'm going to be
Definitely.
seen as a nuisance right
Mm.
from the start, even while they're looking for talent, then what is my experience going to be like working there? So it's almost a test. If it, yes, I'm disabled, how are you going to respond to that? And if they respond in a very positive way, that's great. This is an organization where I can probably thrive. If it's in a very negative way, I'm not sure I want to work there anyway. But I think the important thing is that if we do decide for whatever reason that we are going to talk about being disabled, it needs to be done in a really, really positive way. So, some of our candidates will spend the first half hour of an interview telling their prospective employer exactly why they shouldn't employ them.
Oh,
Well, I've got this and I've got that, and I can't do this and I can't do that, and I'm going to need this and I'm going to need something else. No employer wants to hear that. So, for me, I would say if you're going to talk about your disability, do it in a really positive way. So it might be, I need these adjustments for the recruitment process so that you can see how well I can perform.
yeah.
It's not, oh, I'm going to be a nuisance and I'm really sorry. And if we're going to a prospective employer or a recruiter, not to do so apologetically, oh, I'm really sorry, I might be a bit of a nuisance because I'm going to need, but to go and
Mm.
say, actually, I've got all of the things that you're asking for this job, but I'm a disabled person, so I'm bringing these additional things with me too. So it's done in a very positive way. It's not apologetic. It's about almost saying to the employer, lucky you, because you've got a great candidate for this role on steroids.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm exaggerating slightly, I know, and that degree of
I
arrogance
do
might
that
be a
to my
bit
can.
off-putting, but it is about going in with that mental attitude that says, I'm absolutely the right candidate for this role because I bring so much additional talent with me. And if that's in your mindset, you come over as more confident and positive,
Mm.
you're more likely to get the job.
And do you know what? I'm going to be honest, I'm guilty of maybe having that narrative, and still maybe have that narrative until a few years ago, where I did come in and tell an employer, that question we all get an interview, what's your biggest weakness or what's your greatest weakness? I just say, I'm visually impaired, registered blind, so it does take me longer to do things, but I will try to make up for it. And now when you said that and I'm thinking, I'm like, oh my God, I was putting myself down over my disability. And it's scary to think that you have that so built into yourself that this is a weakness when you have so much more to offer because of it. As you said, premium talent. But I wanted to ask another little question then. For the businesses you work with, then, how does that come about? Do they approach you, and what happens there when they build that bridge with yourselves for a partnership?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Right up until the pandemic, it was a really hard sell. So we'd go out, we'd do events, and we'd go out and we'd talk to employers and we'd say, look, there's a whole pool of talent here you're missing out on. And often it would be the kind of, oh, poor things kind of thing, or, oh, well, we're a business, not a charity. And then we'd have to go through the whole business case stuff. But it was hard work. It was a hard sell. And also because we were saying, you know, it would be great if you advertised your jobs on Evenbreak as well as everywhere else. So it wasn't that we were saying use us instead of something else. It was seen as an additional cost, and we would present it as an investment, but it would be seen as, we're already using X number of job boards. Why would we want to use yet another one? It's going to be more expensive. And since the pandemic, and obviously there were a lot of enlightened employers who weren't like that and who have been working with us for many years. But bizarrely, maybe since the pandemic, it's turned on its head. And I think it's a whole range of things. I think it's about, the fact that inequality was such a spotlight was shone on it during the pandemic, the inequality for certain groups. The fact that working from home was suddenly seen as, oh, people who work from home don't skive. In fact, if anything, the problem is they work harder and we have to make sure they take proper breaks. And also, I think, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, the whole equality thing,
Mm.
became on the agenda. But also the huge skill shortage there is across every sector at the moment. So now what we're finding is we're almost fighting off employers, that they're coming to us and saying, we need your talent. Yeah, I know. We've been telling you that for decades, but actually, that realization, and I don't care, I don't care what the catalyst is. The fact that employers are now recognizing disabled people as a source of talent rather than as a problem to be solved, I welcome that, and I'm happy to work with organisations who may have got that realisation a bit later than we'd have liked, but they're there now. So it's a much easier set. Well, we're hardly having to sell; we're getting people sort of proactively coming to us. So that's great, and I think a lot of it for us is around that positive narrative. So it's very much about the business case. It always has been long before the pandemic. We've always worked from home before the pandemic and can demonstrate how well that works. So I think there's a whole range of reasons why it's changed, but our narrative hasn't been changed. So we're still saying this is about talent. So, you want to advertise on our board, that's fantastic, because you will get more talent than you would otherwise have got. It's not about, oh, it's great that you're thinking of disabled people now because we were so disadvantaged during or whatever it is. Nothing to do with that. It's still, the story is always about talent and not about pity.
I love that. I love that. And then look, with your details for Evenbreak, I am going to post them onto our website so people can check that out. If you are somebody looking for a job at the moment, please do check that out. I went on myself, and it is probably one of the most accessible job boards I've ever been on. So it is completely accessible. And if you're an employer, reach out to Jane and the team, because there's no reason why we're this day and age, but you should be hiring premium talent. As you just heard.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Jamie. Can I just also mention that if there are disabled people listening who um, need support, career support, so it might be, what do I do with a CV that looks a bit weak because I've not had the opportunities I should have had, or I've had gaps, or whatever it might be. We also run a career support service, Career Hive. So if you want to put that on there as well, it's completely
definitely.
delivered by
Yeah.
people with lived experience of disability. So we have careers coaches who can give one-to-one coaching. We have online events. We have online resources. We have signposting. So, and there's absolutely no charge ever. So if any
Oh, wow.
candidates, are thinking, I could really do with some support, but I don't know where to go,
Mm.
come to Evenbreak, to our Career
Brilliant,
Hive.
and we'll link that
Oh,
up,
thank
and we'll try to put some of that out when those events happen. So we will, Jane, on our website and publicise that for you. Absolutely brilliant, like so much resource there, and so much. Like, I'm going to be honest, I'm really inspired, and I'm really second guessing my history and my previous self. But I'm like, look to the future, look to the future. But Jane, just before we kind of come into our inclusive rant and start to wrap up, I just wanted to touch on your books as well, because you had shared some of your books with me, and I'm going to be honest, it was probably one of the best resources I've ever had to help me. Even I come from the perspective of being disabled. I understand what I need when it comes to recruitment. But reading what you've wrote about how to break those barriers, do you want to touch on that, where people can maybe check out your writing?
Yeah, no, for sure. So I'm not an academic, I'm a practitioner. So the books I wrote are um, very practical, they're
Mm,
conversational, as opposed to being academic. But the first one is called A Dozen Brilliant Reasons to Employ Disabled People. And it was really capturing all of those things we talked about earlier on why disabled candidates are premium candidates. And I wrote it primarily for employers because I was getting this response of, oh, poor things, we should give them a chance. No. So if I get it all down, write it all down. Or even if I was talking to people who got it, within organizations, they would have to make the business case to the decision maker or the person with the budget. And I
mm,
wanted to make it easier for them to make that business case. So that book brings together all the research and the studies and my lived experience and lived experience of people I know about the business benefits of employing disabled people. And then after I wrote that one, people were saying, okay, we get it. This is about talent, not pity. But
mm.
how do we employ? How do we recruit? How do we attract? And so the second book was about the why, really. So that's called, there's a theme here, A Dozen Great Ways to Recruit Disabled People. And it kind of goes through the recruitment process right from identifying a vacancy through to job offer and onboarding and everything in between, and all of the barriers that disabled people might find in that process and what employers can do to remove those barriers. And so that one definitely is aimed at employers. But the first one, strangely enough, and I think perhaps I need to write a slightly different version of it, although it was aimed at employers, a lot of disabled people have read that book, a dozen brilliant reasons to employ disabled people, and have said, wow, I'm so much greater than I thought I was. I'm such a better candidate than I thought I was. I'd never looked at myself in that positive way before. So actually, that message is just as important for us as disabled people as it is for employers who are trying to attract our talent.
100%. I think we realised with my self-realisation when we were talking today, it definitely is. I think like, if this was a TED Talk, Jane, I can imagine you doing TED Talks because honestly, this whole episode has been absolutely amazing. So it has been really inspiring. I feel absolutely humbled that you've been here today and I'm so thankful. So thank you so much for diving into your history. I'm hoping maybe we get you back in the future or we can look to
Yeah,
support in the
absolutely.
future.
Me too.
But bringing up to our all-inclusive rant, I'll hand over to Fuchsia.
Oh, here we go. Right. For those of you who don't know, I'm going to be on TV next week as the first art nude wheelchair model to ever be shown on data primetime TV. Channel 4. Draws off. Watch it.
So
Hey!
proud.
But because I'm going to be obviously a superstar now, I'm going to be winning Oscars across the board. I'm going to a works do in 3 weeks. Not for Channel 4, no, for my actual day job. Fancy, fancy place, 5-star venue, corporate events, weddings. We were told that it's wheelchair accessible. Ladies and gentlemen, and you beautiful rainbows, guess what? It is not wheelchair accessible.
Shock.
And boy, are we going to be kicking up a stink. This is going to be so much fun. I didn't want to go, but all my colleagues were like, no, Fuchsia, you're coming, and we are going to raise merry hell and make it as difficult for them as humanly possible. So, I'll probably report back on the next podcast about how that went.
Also check out your Twitter because I'm sure it will appear on your Twitter too. I cannot wait to see how it gets on. And you're just right to call it out. So you're just right to call it out. So Jane, what about yourself? What is your uninclusive rant of the week?
Yeah, so mine is about employers who, now the pandemic they perceive is over, are insisting on everybody going back into the workplace. I've heard Boris Johnson say the same thing. We should all be going back to the office. And I just don't get it because we've proved that people working from home works. So we know it now. We've had this social experiment foisted on us and we know that remote working works. Why on earth would we then say, oh, well, no, we're going to forget all that we've learned in the pandemic and everybody's got to come back in the office? Now, I get it. Lots of people want to go back to the office, disabled or otherwise. If you're living in a house with young kids or shared accommodation, or you just love being at work because you love your colleagues, that's great. You should have the opportunity to go back. But why insist that everybody does? It's not just disabled people that benefit from working from home. It could be people with caring responsibilities or young families or, people who hate the rush hour, and who doesn't hate the commute in the rush hour. So why have we not learnt what we've just learned over the 2.5 years? We're going to ignore that and all the evidence we've got about remote working mean we've got a wider pool of candidates, and our employees are more fulfilled and more productive and more happy. And hybrid working, yeah, that's fine. But why insist on everybody doing one kind of work when we know now that the more flexible our workplace, the more flexible our work practices, not only the more diverse talent do we attract, but everybody's happier and more productive. What is going on?
It's like a step
Alan
back.
Sugar with all his friends. It is.
Oh, it is. It's like a step back, and I've seen some recruiters on LinkedIn start to jump on the bandwagon, calling people lazy for not wanting to come into the office, and almost like saying they've laughed at people. And I'll be honest, I'm very polite at reminding them, well, actually, disabled people, this has opened up the world of working to a lot of disabled people who couldn't do it before. So your perception is completely wrong. LinkedIn is actually going to be about my rant as well. Now, not LinkedIn himself, because we all know I love my LinkedIn, but my rant is about those working within the D&I space, so diversity, equity, inclusion, people who are working within that space who are posting about the work they may be doing in the disability space. And I think it's really great, and it's really great to see, but they're not making their content accessible. So they're missing alt text images. They're not adding audio description. They're not even using camel case hashtags. And if anyone is on my LinkedIn, I'm sure you all know I like to rant about this a lot, but it just baffles me that you can be talking about we're doing so great here, but missing out people who may be using screen readers, can't pick up what your hashtags are saying, people who are blind, visually impaired, can't see what your images are, we don't know what's going on in your video. So for me, I'm just like, we're 50% there. Let's get over that last little hurdle and let's make it fully inclusive. So that's my rant, and thank you so much for both your rants. But that has brought us to the end of the episode. So again, Jane, thank you so much for joining us, and we really can't wait to see your journey or where the future brings you, and we hope to work with you again.
Thank you very much. Absolutely delighted to be here.
Brilliant. Well, goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me. Love you. Mwah.
You've been listening to That Thing Called Inclusion. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. Check out our website, www.thatthingcalledInclusion.com, for transcripts of each episode, or on YouTube for video and closed captions. Or check out our socials at That Inclusion. If you'd like to join us on the show as a guest speaker or advocate organization, then please drop us an email at info@thatthingcalledInclusion.com. Until next time, stay inclusive.